I'm Rick from Cartridge Classic Cars. On this video, we're back on this 1970 Cuda, and as you could see behind me with all these parts, we'll be doing some front end sheet metal install. So these are all bolt-on parts on the car. If you go back to our last videos, you could see where this car was basically nothing. It's a brand new body front to rear, and we already welded in the whole inner structure except the top inner fender brackets and running down the side. That's going to allow us, you could see maybe in the video, if we have to adjust the hood, we'll do it off there with the hood hinges. So with these videos, I usually like, or these cars in general, I usually like to bolt on the front sheet metal before we put on the rear sheet metal. That gives me a good idea where I have to go. We're not moving stuff around. Since the rear, I have more play in it. I like to adjust everything where it fits in the bolt holes, since everything should bolt on and off on these cars. And I want to make it easy, you know, where the rear end, if we match that to the front, it just makes it a whole lot less cumbersome versus the next time you take this apart to paint, or if you ever have to change something. And the reason why it's important, see, what we do first, we align the doors on these cars, these E-body cars first. I like to get the rocker set down here, and I went through the past week off camera since the last video. You could see where we did the door skins, and I adjusted everything on both sides of these doors. They're exactly where I want them. The gap on our door jamb back here, I mean, it moves a little bit, but I'm acceptable and I'm happy with it. The bottom gap is straight and in line, and I'm matching the rockers pretty close down here, right along the whole side. That's not saying we're gonna go in and out, but the reason I do the front sheet metal is, let's say this door comes in and out. So if I pull this top hinge out, the top hinge out, and leave this bottom in, so we're twisting the door out, that's gonna do the opposite. It's gonna actually push this back bottom corner in and then pull this top corner out. So what that's going to allow us to do, if we welded in our quarter panels back here and we had them set in stone, and then we go to put the front sheet metal on, well, we might have a 1/2 inch gap on the front of this hood hinge, and that side might be touching, or we might have 1/2 inch on both sides we can't overcompensate for. So like I said, I like to do the bolt-on stuff first where it fits comfortably, and then we can test fit the back end. Now, saying that, you can see there's a Nova right here. There's no front end on this Nova. I just put the back end on. The Novas are a little different. I'll go over that. We also don't have the front subframe on this car. We're bound by the Nova on these door jambs and everything else. So in general, I'm not saying that every car has to be done this way, and different circumstances, you know, call for different, you know, build ideas and what the process. So on most of the cars that are done like this, the E-bodies, the Mopars, really even the F-body cars, I do like to go this level. I've had more success with it because then we don't have 10 holes in the back end because we had to move the rear end 4 or 5 times. So like I said, we're going to follow this video. We're going to bolt these on. We are using original fenders on this car. They are in rough shape. So when you see the hood back there is rusted, the 2 fenders have been stripped down and they were sent down, or the owner bought them from a swap meet in epoxy primer. So they're original 70 fenders, sorry, 71. Cudas have the side gills, but 71 Barracudas, you know, won't. So saying that, they are original 70 Cuda fenders. They have some dents on them. I don't know if we're going to fix them. We're going to get them on the car first. The whole video is get everything on the car, analyze the situation, let the owner make the call. The owner is also going to finish some of this car on his own, some of the small brackets, some of the small things. These fenders might be something he wants to tackle. We'll talk about it. We're going to install the lower valance. You can see this has also got a bunch of dents. It's an original piece, probably a match set off these fenders. And we also got the header panel. So this is a brand new 70 Cuda header panel. So the differences on the 70 Cudas, they have the whole frame grill insert with the lower area here. So if you're building a 70 Cuda, this is the only one that will fit for you. We also have an example, since we're talking about Cudas, of I believe it should be a 71 header panel. So this is a 71 header panel, and I believe it because it's got this bracket here and the horns are on the inside. I believe, now don't quote me on this, but the 71 to 74 Cuda header panels are the same shape on them. The difference is going to be in the grill mounting locations, because the grill on a 72 to 74 and a 71 Cuda are going to be different. So if you were going to convert, you know, if it would bolt on, but when you go to put your grill in, the holes are in a different location. And same thing, usually tell the reason I think it's on a 71 Cuda is I believe the horns were up front on a 71, and 72 to 74, they moved the horns for pollution or something like that. So someone in the comments can quote me if they're wrong, but there is a slight difference on the 72 to 74 Cuda header panels on the grill locations. You can't just put a 72, 74 Cuda grill in a 71. So we're going to go ahead and bolt the hood on. We're going to go ahead and get the hood hinges on. You'll see the process. This is how I like to do the front end. I do recommend buying the fender bolt kit. It comes with the studs for the fender up here. We did also put these fender brackets on before we started. So let's get to some work. It's going to be a short video. We're just going to bolt on parts. I'm going to show you how we kind of adjust them, and we'll go from there. We'll do a final closeout video and show you what we got. So stay tuned.
So the first step in what should have been a fairly easy process was to bolt on the hood hinge. You could see I usually get the bolts in the front first, and then trying to locate the bolts in the back. I'm at the maximum adjustment on my front bolt area. That's a red flag. These are pre-built pieces, and they had the brackets on them that they didn't fit initially. So what I decided to do was to go ahead and we're going to relocate that front adjustable brackets for the bolts on the hood hinges. We're going to just move them first, see where that puts us, get the fenders on the car, and see what other issues we're going to run into. So the first step to move the hood hinges is to get that rear bracket off the car. So we're going to go ahead and drill out the spot welds. We're going to take a look at it. We're going to readjust it. We're going to basically put the hood hinge back on using the rear bolts, locating it, and then readjusting the front bolt hole in place. There won't be a permanent solution until everything's on there, and you can see as we're pulling these brackets off, a lot of these Dynacorn parts and other manufacturers, they don't put weld through primer like we do through all our panels. So you can see the back sides of them, there's rust forming on a lot of these parts like this right here once we drill out the spot holes, and then same thing on the bracket. So we'll get it cleaned up.
All right, we didn't make it far and we have some major issues. So let me explain, if you haven't seen previous videos on this car, where we're at, and I believe what the cause of this. So this car is sitting on an E-body frame jig. I built many of these Cudas and Challengers on in this shop. So saying that, the E-body frame jig with the Cudas and Challengers is the same from the main floor pan forward, the inner structure on what we're jigging off of. So we just had 2 Challengers built that were hand built on this jig, worked out fine. We actually did a 70 Cuda, I think it was a month and 2 months ago, something like that. But they were all built on this jig recently and everything worked fine. So with this car, the owner had some Dynacorn full frame rail, shock tower, inner fender, and radiator support up to half the radiator support pieces. So I didn't build anything, and then it went to the firewall, and if you saw in a previous video, we removed that bracket. So all that has become pre-assembled. Usually on this E-body cars, I like all the pieces where I can put them together. You know, a lot of times, and the owner didn't know this, you know, I think this is even before he was contacting me. He thought whoever's going to build this car, they'll save a bunch of time and effort with the whole front end completely together. Well, it doesn't, and I'll show you why. So basically where we're at, we have our firewall and everything that's jigged off our main floor pan and our torsion bar cross member. So that's going to be in the center of the car. All that's off the original rocker panels. You saw, looking at our doors are lined up off those same rocker panels. So that's our external sheet metal reference point. Our firewall floor pan comes up, and you could see our A-pillars didn't move on the factory car. I didn't put them in, so the angles are the same. Our cowl panel, upper and lower, fit in here perfectly, and then that sandwiches the firewall to the floor pan. So the cowl panel, firewall, this is all one unit. So I'm pretty confident from here back, the car, everything is straight. You can see our firewall isn't bowed crazy, it's straight. So saying that, our frame rails come off, these frame rails right here, come off the torsion bar support that was jigged in the back. So you could see, and they actually aligned with the factory torque boxes we left in the car that I also made reference points. So I do reference points on everything on these cars. This frame jig has a K-member, so that would be the front cross member that holds the wheels and everything that bolts in welded to this frame table. So this doesn't move on any of my builds. It's always at one point. Off this K-member, I use the frame bolts for the factory K-member as my jig pieces. And then I have 2 pins in the front of the K-member that straighten the frame rail. So really, there's only one way this whole frame rail can sit in this E-body car. Taking measurements, the distance from the front of the frame rail to the torsion bar support is correct. The frame rail piece is correct. What I believe is going on here, I'm gonna show you where we're at. The Dynacorn, who's ever welding these different pieces together, you know, and they do it from, you know, the Dynacorn plant or whoever building these, they're using jigs themselves, but the jigs aren't the entire car. So what you come up with, the car's wrong. So when you try to put a whole car together, it can never be straight. And the same thing I say, you know, I start this video, oh, we'll just bolt on parts, easy video. Well, this is usually how it works. A lot of these cars, you know, same thing with the first gen GM cars, with a lot of these companies building the Dynacorn, I don't want to throw anyone's name on there. Let's say these full body cars. Well, they say just bolt your front sheet metal on. Unless you test fit all these parts, I don't think you 100% know. That's why if any owner that will let me, I'll take the whole car, we'll put the bumpers on and everything, because I want to know everything fits, even with the aftermarket parts. If you have everything that's a 1/4 inch, even a panel that's a 1/4 inch off here or there, external sheet metal, well, I want to know that part fits on that car. So saying that, where we're at and the problem with this car, I told you why I feel my frame jig is right off these E-bodies. It's not my first car that I've done on this one. Not trying to hype myself up, I'm just trying to say that we've had lots of success on these cars. But you can see right here, this is the worst side. So right here, we had to cut the inner fender, and then the brackets, this bracket was sitting on the car. So I believe the bracket was welded correctly on the inner fender looking back. Looking at our hood hinge, there was our original hood bolt. This right here is where the hood hinge wants to be located, right there. So we know this bracket right here in this corner is correct, because that's located off the cowl panel. So that puts our hood hinge, you know, that far, let's say an inch, let's call it an inch from the maximum adjustment, okay? So now we know that's an inch that this whole inner fender has to go forward. So saying that, usually these inner fenders, you can see how thick it is over here. So this inner fender is curving, and it takes a hard 90, and you see it gets real fat right here. The inner fenders on a lot of these cars, when I put them on there and I assemble them, I usually have to notch this area out. It looks like someone, whoever built this from the place that Dynacorn gets it built from, jammed it up against the shock tower and put it up there and welded it. So what that did, that kicked this whole inner fender apart. Now, we were gonna band-aid it, we'll say, by removing the hinge bolts. And as I was removing them, I said, you know what? Before we go too crazy on this, let's start test fitting the fenders and the external sheet metal. The fenders are gaps, we'll say they're not adjusted. I just got the pin sitting right here, and I have it basically gapped out about where we're at. You know, we're talking, we can fine tune these fenders, but we're talking, here's our fender bolts. So every one of these fender bolts are sitting right here, including the front radiator support. So that's the same exact distance that the hood hinges are off. And this is not, a lot of times I could sit there and open these up a little bit and we could hone them out. That's not doable. So what needs to happen, obviously I'm saying do all these measurements and thinking about this inner fender is welded on this car in the wrong spot based on the own brackets that they gave. And like I said, this came as a kit with the frame rail, and it's the first time I used it. And I told the owner, we try it. We don't know what's going to happen on it. We might have to pull parts out. So what I believe we're going to have to do, we're going to have to remove this inner fender off here, off the frame rail here, and cut it out here, move the whole inner fender forward. We might be able to leave it on the radiator support and let the radiator support roll forward with it, because the radiator support's set in the front fenders, everything else. And I don't want to just drill new holes, because the radiator support is going to locate the grill, the headlights assemblies. If we start band-aiding at this point, when we see this major issue, then we're out of adjustment, this is just going to lead to issues and things just not fitting on this car down the road. So now is the time to fix it. Now's the time to move this inner fender. Now, another thing with this inner fender, I don't know if you could see it. So this inner fender, looking at it, this one, same thing, holding the hood hinge up, it's only about 1/4 inch off. So our hood bolts, so saying that if this is our fender bolt sitting right here, our maximum adjustment's only right here. So we're looking at right there versus right there. So this one's 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch off on our maximum adjustment. So saying that, they did the same thing on this side, but they didn't do it as extreme. And you can actually see that this one is crammed over. So there's a stamping difference between this side inner fender and this side inner fender, and it's causing the car to be crooked. So what we have to do, like I said, I'm gonna talk to the owner about this side. We're gonna take, I'm gonna probably give him a call right now. Ned, I know what's going on, but what's gonna happen, this inner fender is gonna have to come off. And I believe this one, while we're doing it, we might as well take this inner fender off, fix it, get it where our bolts bolt right in, our radiator support, and get our cross square and everything. The only distance I took so far on this car was this one, the distance there to there. And that's for our hood hinges when we were assembling and screwing in this piece. The reason, like I said, I didn't take this, because all this was pre-built. I can adjust it now that we got to pull it apart. But the idea was to get the back in, square the car up, see how it looks on the fenders, and then address the situation. So, like I said, we're gonna fix it. We're not gonna throw this to the wind. It's not the end of the world. It's a problem, but that's why I feel that I like, if I'm building these cars for a customer, if you're building them at home, these pieces do seem enticing. And yes, you could save some money with these pieces. However, if like the rear floor pan, actually, that was a one-piece rear floor pan on this car. It fit great. I know in the future, there's probably a good chance I would reuse that rear floor section. But let's say the tech was lazy on that day and then they got that one off. So I don't like to rely on someone else putting these parts together, because now we have to sit there and scratch our heads and fight what's going on. If I can have each one of these parts, we can prep them and weld them, it would now save us the twice amount of time it's going to take to disassemble the parts and then reassemble it. And saying that, in the reassembly phase, I can't spot weld this with my spot welder, so we're gonna have to MIG weld them and grind them down. So really, what we thought about would save a bunch of money on these cars is gonna end up costing a lot more in this phase. So I'm gonna check with the owner, make sure we're good with this, because like I said, this is not the time to start band-aiding this car, because there'll just be issues down the road for this car. Now that we've addressed this situation, we're gonna fix it. So stay tuned. We're going to make a phone call, and then we'll get to the rest of this work, which was supposed to be a short video, but now you're going to see a lot more front end work, sheet metal work on this Cuda. But we'll get the front end on at the end of this video.
We're going to try to speed up a lot of this work, as it's a lot of the initial work on the tear down of the car, removing panels and everything. Usually at this phase, I'm not really tearing most parts down, But like I said, it's the same process, so we'll kind of jump around and speed up. The first thing what I'm doing, and what I do like about these Dynacorn parts, is the spot welds are very well defined. It's all brand new metal. There's never been seam sealer on it. There hasn't been, rust really developing in these spot welds, and tons of layers of paint. So we can see all these spot welds real fast. I drilled the initial pilot hole, the 1/8 inch hole, through the center of the spot welds, and what I'm doing, I'm using this spot weld cutter right now so I don't drill through the shock tower. It's just going to make it easier right there. So I'm just coming through it, and what we're doing, we're just protruding through the inner fender sheet metal itself. Once I get through there, then we're good. We're going to stop so we don't go any further. And then you can see I'm also got to remove the spot welds on the top, and there's 2 spot welds in the front. And actually what we're going to do, we're going to remove the whole radiator support on the inner fender. We're going to just pull this whole panel off. Peeling it back, I found some rust in there also, so it's going to just be easier pulling this whole panel back. We're going to go ahead and make some metal patches because we're going to have to move forward more on the passenger side than the driver's side. But as you can see, once we drill out these spot welds, we're not doing any damage to this panel. This is how you would save a panel if you're trying to keep it a factory original panel. So it does take a lot more work versus using the air chisel and just ripping the panel right out and then throwing a new one on there. But it can be done. We're going to do it right here. And then, like I said, with the same process on drilling the factory spot welds out, this panel is going to have to be modified, and we're actually going to make patches just so it just blends in really nice, and it just, when you look at it with the hood open, the engine in it, nothing stands out. That's the whole idea behind this car. On this side of the inner fender, they also put stitch welds down below, so we had to go ahead and just cut those out. And you can see I am using an air chisel, but I'm using it very carefully. Just the areas that we might have been slightly off on the spot welds, those are the only areas I'm really working. Another thing I do want to point out, like we did earlier, all of these panels have no weld through primer anywhere. These are brand new panels, and look at the rust that is developed underneath them. Now that we have the inner fenders off, we'll go ahead and address all the issues with the panels. One, the rust on the top. We're going to go ahead and put weld through primer on that. But before then, I went through where my pilot holes went, and I welded everything up in the shock towers. And then I'm going to clean off the rest of the spot welds we drill out. This is going to give us a really smooth, clean surface to weld the panels back on the car. So same thing on the top. This is the area with all that rust. We're going to drill out the spot welds. Also, I want to note these brackets on top, they are also, it seems like, in the wrong spot. They're just the distance between the cowl panel and the brackets is just wrong. Everything's starting to point signs to is the shock towers. The shocks they're either tilted back or they're set back too far. So not a huge deal. We're not going to pull the shock towers off. That gets into a whole nother ball game. And if you look at other videos of mine, you see I think there's a benefit of having the shock towers back a little bit more. And if they're tilted back more, there's just anti-dive built into the car also. Again, not the end of the world. What I'm going to do right now, you could see I got the inner fenders on the car. I have the fenders bolted on and now gapped against the doors and everywhere they need to go. So what I'm doing now, I'm readjusting the inner fenders based on the holes coming from the outer fenders down. So you could see I'm moving it forward, I'm slicing out the back edges of it, and the front of the radiator support also had to be sliced. I'll show you at a different angle right here, and you can really see the stamping differences on this one that's not off as far, where the back of it looks really thin and the front gets thicker. I was trying to find out exactly on the other side. I get they're 2 different parts and there's different things that go on both of them, but to me, it just seems like the other side might be slightly off. But we're gonna have to make a patch on this one. We're gonna just add a little metal on the inside and then MIG weld it down the center. It's just gonna be a little bit of blending here or there, some tricks, just so when you see the car, like I said, you don't realize anything. While we're in the test fitting stage, we're going to have to put the hood hinges back on. I want to get them back located where everything looks good on the hood hinges and that front adjustment nut is centered. So in case there's any adjustment in the future, we have that built into the car. So now that I'm happy with where the hood hinges are, everything's centered, the inner fenders, everything looks good. The hood's been test fit on the car one time and we're happy with it. We're going to go ahead and weld everything up on the inner fender. So like I said, a lot of times I'll go through with the spot welds, and we do put some MIG welds in certain areas because the shock towers are so thick, but we're going to just re-MIG out our holes that we drilled on the initial spot welds on this car. So then once everything's drilled out, we'll come back through with a belt sander. We'll use an 80 grit on a surface prep disc and some 80 grit on a DA, just smoothing out all the welds. The idea, like I said, at this point is just get everything smooth. We're not trying to hide anything. There are some differences we'll go over at the end of the video between these Dynacord frame rail shock towers, inner fenders versus a factory original or an aftermarket AMD that I have messed with also. So we'll go over those in the long run, but right now, like I said, the idea is just get this engine bay. When you pop the hood, the engine's sitting in there, everything's looking clean and like it's been unmodified, a brand new car. And I believe at the end of the video, we'll be able to accomplish that. If you could see on the left of your screen, I also added a strip of metal where we had to pull the inner fender forward to that bracket piece. So that piece was too thick. I added metal in there, and then we went all the way to the firewall like a factory car would have. We also did this on the corresponding side, and as you can see, everywhere on this driver's side and everything looks smooth for the most part, even in its bare metal state. Right now that everything's welded up, we're going to go ahead and reassemble the whole front end again, because now we got to make sure everything else fits on, and I want to gap the car before we prime this thing. Just make sure there's no other issues. I want to put the front header panel on there, everything else. So you can see a lot of times with these cars, I'll put the hood on first. It's just easier to get in with these e-body cars and get the hood centered, adjusted, where you're not fighting and leaning over the fender. So Megan's helping me with that. We just put the bolts on, close it, and kind of get it as centered as we can for the most part on our adjustments. That's going to start the process on putting the front end together. Once we're happy with having the hood on the panel of the car, we'll go ahead and start laying the fenders on the car. What I like to do, I usually get all the bolts in loose. I usually find an area, I'll close the hood and I'll adjust the back of one fender where that hood's going to go in the front bolt, and I just tighten them down. I work on the top first. I'm not worried at all about the bottom yet. I did say earlier that these brackets were really far off, and like I said, I think it's the shock towers pushing them back, but we had to go ahead and trim them back also and make sure they fit. Now, everything on the inner fenders to shock towers to radiator support is welded. What isn't welded are those corner brackets going into the firewall itself coming off the hood hinges. For this final assembly, for like the third time, what we're going to do, we get both fenders on the car. I'm going to close the hood. If something doesn't line up and the hood's off-centered between the fenders, now's the time to adjust it. And what I ended up doing on this car, we ended up pulling the driver's side inner fender in towards the center of the car and pushing the passenger side inner fender out towards the car. What that did, that offset the hood and made it more centered on where the fenders want to be adjusted. These are the important things and why you have to assemble the car 4, 5, 6 times and make sure everything's centered. The front of this car right now is still loose in the grand scheme of things. I'm more focused first on the back fenders to hood with the alignment there and getting the hood coming straight off of that. Then what I do with the front bolts all loose, I'll get the front upper header panel in place, and then we'll close the hood and we can adjust the front end and square it off the hood. Doing it this way makes it a little bit easier to just get your gaps all dialed in. And with the adjustability on the back, we know now we can weld it in that everything is straight and the hood gaps are aligned. If you don't do this and you don't assemble it a couple times and just triple check your measurements, that's where you have gapping issues on your bolt-on parts, and you can only adjust it so much. So now that everything's fit, we're happy with it, we're going to go ahead and seal it in epoxy primer, and then we'll go ahead and walk around and close out the video.
All right, so we're gonna wrap up this video on the front end install on the Cuda and kind of give you a quick summary of where we're at and where we're going. So the front end is back on the Cuda. I did a lot of adjustment off camera, just really dialing in the gaps. What it really comes down to is we get, like I said, the hood on, the fenders on, and what I've noticed since when we put the doors on, the hood and fenders wanted to come out more. So we had to open up the gaps right here. Everything was too tight. So we adjusted the front end. Then we came back through and readjusted the doors and just fine-tuned them to match the fenders, knowing that they're all in the same closed spot. We were focused on this corner still, saying that the corner did go forward a little bit because matching up this arc is these arcs on the bottom corner of the door and the fender don't match exactly. We're talking just ever so slightly. The door kind of straightens out a little bit. So we'll come back through later and grind that, but we're not going to touch anything as far as gapping or grinding on this car until the rear end goes on. And same thing, I don't want to be pulling anything out, trying to adjust it too much. We're just getting everything close. So we are aligned with the rear door jamb very nicely. The front gaps walking around this car, really the whole car in general, the gaps everywhere look really good for an unmodified fenders, hood, and doors. Don't forget, we didn't cut on these, we didn't grind them, we just bolted on them and kind of pulled and pried. The profile on these after our off-camera adjustments look really good. You can look down this side of the car and see how everything is in line, sticking out, you know, so the fenders, everything in general looks really good. Also, when I'm gapping this car and when we're doing the front end before we do the quarters, what I really like to focus on is our body lines are straight. That's going to ensure everything straight. We don't want a fender dipping down in the front, or even worse, lifting up and then dipping down here with the door dipping down. What you could do is these two body lines could be matched up, but the fender's pointed up like this, so your line's coming down and then the door's coming back up. So we really want to look down this car and just watch the body lines. Who's ever designs these cars, it doesn't matter what kind of car it is. You know, so like a 69 Charger, a Cuda, a Challenger, I mean, even the GM, the F-body cars, they all have body lines and they all follow a design flow. So you want to just look down and make sure you're not seeing anything that looks unnatural on the car, especially on these Cudas, because they are so straight down this body line right here. So like I said, we're looking down it, everything looks straight, and then that will follow the curvature up into the quarter panels and then back down. So that's what you're looking for. You want to make sure it's all straight. That's going to also make sure the bottom's straight. That's how we start the process. But now that everything's straight, our hood's looking really good. With these parts, the owner's probably not going to keep the front end. He's going to go through it and look a little for a better set. He did drop them off with the car, knowing that he just wanted to get them on the car and see what they look like and just kind of build the car around original parts. They are in rough shape. They do have some channels under here that someone was trying to weld like a coat hanger under to rebuild this lip that was all eaten up. There looked like that side's been sandblasted a whole bunch. I think this side's been sandblasted. And you can see there's a little bit of waves, mostly in that side, where it's oil canned and stretched out a little bit. So they need a lot of work. I did put the valance, the lower valance on this car, which is also heavily damaged, but it does fit really well. I do have the car backed up against the wall to give me more room. In the future, we'll pull it out and give you a good walk around when the car's all done. But as of right now, the front end, everything's looking really good. The header panel fits good. The hood gaps all the way around are looking really good. So in general, we got the hood latch on the car. We'll go on the inside. The inside of the car obviously was where the issue was. and all our inner fenders, we did all the work. Right now, looking at it, it looks really good in general. I think I'm happy with it. If you look at it, you can't really see. Now, saying that, these fenders, the inner fenders, the Dynacorn frame rails, let's go over a couple things. What I've noticed, I've been racking my brain trying to figure out where the issue is on these frame rails. So I have a couple cars at the other shop, and then here Cudas and Challengers, factory ones at the front ends weren't messed with. I took a bunch of measurements on. So where we're at, I've come to the conclusion, one, the shock towers and frame rails, if you're looking for a complete OEM factory Cuda or Challenger, these are obvious as soon as you look at them, if you know what you're looking for, to know that they are not a factory style, frame and shock tower assembly. You could see on the inside of the shock tower, on a factory one, there's these two squares that are factory stitch welded right around. There's heavy stitches on the bottom, and actually with these taking the measurements, these two frame rail shock towers are back 3/8 to 1/2 inch on both sides compared to the factory cars that I measured off of. Saying that, that's not a bad thing because these cars are notorious not for getting caster. Go check out my video on 73 Challenger getting caster camber on alignment on the front end, and you'll see how I build one of these front ends and how I like to do it all in pieces and where I can adjust it. So I'll actually move mine back a little bit too. So I'm not knocking that, but looking at it, they just have spot welds where those two holes are. The front of the frame rails are curved. They got a little bit of an arch in them where they're bent forward. Also, I believe they are a little bit short. I don't know exactly where. We're talking 1/4 inch on the front of these rails. This radiator support wants to come forward a little bit, and it's kind of sandwiched in there on the rails. So the rails are there's slight issues with them. And I think it's a little bit here, a little bit there. Also the corners on the rails, nothing matches the factory. If you're looking for a factory style replacement rail that doesn't look like it's been, put in there, that these rails with the corners and the certain parts on them, you could tell the difference on if you know what you're looking for. But I think between the shock towers being moved back a little bit, that's where most of our issue were. And then the inner fenders are just stamped wrong based on the shock tower. So the guy who's assembling these, just like I said, throws them together. And I still go back to it. Our shock tower cross member is in the right location. I mean, the cross member for the torsion bars are in the right location. Our rocker panels have not moved on this car. They're factory style rocker panels. Everything's been jigged. Our fenders are about touching the rocker panels. So our gap on the stock OEM fenders from here to here is preset. We can't move them. So right there, we know our radius support has to go here. Now that it's curving in, and then our inner fenders are supposed to fit between the two. It's just nothing lined up. So there's nowhere I feel to build this car the proper way, leaving those panels together. So I stand by it that if I was going to redo this, or if anyone ever suggests in the future, I like to put the cars together from a bunch of pieces that I can adjust and fix. All these parts, the aftermarket, they're great, but they have slight issues. So if all these parts have slight issues and you throw them all together, and now you have a larger issue. So like I said, just going over it, not that it's bad. We were able to fix it. I feel like this car's done really well. I'm happy with it. I think the car looks good. It's gapped good. The owner's gonna be able to put another front end on this car to bolt on parts, and everything's gonna go good. So again, we can fix whatever it is. Unfortunately, where the thinking was to maybe save some money on this factory OEM full Dynacorn pieces, it ended up costing more money because we had to pull them all apart, find all the issues, and then put them back on the car. So it's not the end of the world, but just some thinking if you're doing this, that sometimes the pre-built pieces can be more of an issue than it's worth. I'm not saying I haven't used them. We've had success in the past, and if you watch our videos, you've seen it. So that's about it for this video. On the next video on this Cuda, we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna start on the rear. We're gonna put the whole rear end on this car, and this thing really is gonna start coming together and taking full shape on the Cuda. So I appreciate everyone sticking along for this video. I know it was a lot longer than I thought. You know, stuff happens. I was wondering how we're gonna fill up the time on the video, but all the fender issues and everything, it looks like it came out to be a, you know, a learning video for myself included on using these parts and everything else. So it was a challenge. We got it done. Thank you again for sticking along. Please check out our Facebook page for other builds that we do, Carthage Classic Cars. Please like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And check out my buddy Eddie's charity who helps kids in need, eddybear.org. He does great things. If you got stuffed animals, please send them their way. They have to be new, unopened, unwrapped, and new, and just tags still on them. So please, like I said, go check out his charity. Maybe send them some stuff. Let's help kids in need out. And I'm Rick from Carthage Classic Cars, and we'll see you on the next video.